Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Yes.
Today we're diving into something.
Okay.
I think that's pretty universal.
Okay.
We're going to be talking about relationship maintenance.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, we think about all the different relationships we have in our lives,
Mhm.
and I think sometimes we have this vision of like grand gestures and these big moments. But what's really cool about this research is that it really dives into the everyday things.
Yeah. Interesting.
So that's what we're going to be talking about today.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that a lot because, we often think about those big moments,
Right. Yeah.
the big anniversary or the big fight or whatever it is. But
Yeah.
really, it's all of those little things
Yeah.
that make up the fabric of our relationship.
Okay.
It's like weaving a tapestry,
Yeah.
thread by thread.
Yes.
Each interaction,
Yes.
each moment of support, each moment of positivity, all of those things add up to create something really beautiful and strong.
Exactly. And one of the things that I thought was really interesting in the research is that they don't even necessarily define relationship maintenance as just keeping a relationship alive.
Right.
It's about keeping it in a desired state.
Exactly.
So it's not just like treading water.
Yeah. It's about intentionally
Right.
cultivating the kind of relationship you want.
Yes, and making sure that it's satisfactory to both people
Absolutely.
involved, right?
It's a two-way street for sure.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to kind of dig into the nitty-gritty here.
Okay, let's do it.
Yeah. So let's start with like the really fundamental stuff. Like, what are some of those everyday things that can actually make a big difference in our relationships?
Okay, well, I think communication is a great place to start
Okay.
because so much of relationship maintenance boils down to how we communicate with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And researchers, Canary and Stafford, they identified 5 communication strategies that are super important for relationship maintenance.
Wow, 5. Okay.
Yeah, and we can break those down.
Okay, perfect.
But just to give you a quick overview,
Yes.
we're talking about positivity,
Okay.
openness,
Okay.
assurances,
Yes.
social networks, and sharing tasks.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so it's not just the communication itself, but it's the way
Exactly.
that we communicate.
Yeah, it's the content of our communication, but it's also the style,
Uh-huh.
right?
Okay.
Like, are we being positive? Are we being open? Are we offering assurances?
Okay, so let's break those down one by one because I think those are really important.
Yeah, let's start with positivity.
Okay.
So this is all about, expressing affection,
Okay.
showing appreciation,
Mm-hmm.
being encouraging, offering compliments,
Okay.
and really trying to avoid those harsh criticisms or negative comments.
Oh, so it's like creating a safe space
Yeah.
where you can, feel comfortable being yourself.
Yeah.
Also expressing, positive things to the other person.
It's about creating a climate of positivity
Yeah,
where you both feel supported and appreciated,
I love that.
right? And it goes a long way.
It does.
Okay, so the next one is openness.
Okay.
And this is all about being willing to share your thoughts and feelings honestly,
Right.
even when it's tough.
Right. Even when it's a little scary.
Yeah, exactly. Vulnerability is a big part of this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about being a good listener too,
Right.
right? Really hearing each other out and trying to understand each other's perspectives.
And it's interesting because, being open and vulnerable can sometimes lead to conflict.
Right.
But it's also, I think, the pathway to like deeper intimacy or
That's how
connection.
Conflict can be a good thing
Yeah.
if it's handled constructively
Right.
because it allows us to work through issues
Right.
and come to a deeper understanding of each other.
Yeah. So it's not about avoiding conflict altogether.
Right.
It's about approaching it
Exactly.
in a healthy way.
In a way that strengthens the relationship.
Yeah. Okay. I love that. Now, what about assurances?
Okay, so assurances are all about reminding each other of your commitment
Okay.
and appreciation for the relationship.
Mhm.
It's like saying, hey, I'm here for you.
Yeah.
I value our connection
You like that?
and I'm not going anywhere.
Yeah.
It's about reassuring each other that you're in it for the long haul.
Yeah. And those can be verbal assurances, but I think they can also be, actions.
Absolutely.
Right.
Actions speak louder than words sometimes.
Exactly. So like showing up for somebody,
Yep.
Being there when they need you,
Exactly.
following through on your promises, all of those things.
All of those things communicate
Yeah.
commitment and care.
Yeah. And I think sometimes we forget how important those little reminders are.
Right.
Because, we can get so caught up in the day to day
Yeah.
that we forget to just stop and say, hey, I appreciate you.
Absolutely. And, sometimes we assume that our partners know how we feel,
Yeah.
but it's always nice to hear it.
Yep, this.
To be reminded
Yes.
of how much we mean to each other.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we've got positivity, Openness assurances.
Yeah.
What's next?
Social networks.
Okay, so this is interesting because this is kind of goes beyond just the two people in the relationship.
Exactly.
Right.
It's about the broader social context of the relationship.
So like friends, family,
Yeah.
coworkers.
Yeah, having shared friends, spending time with each other's families, doing activities together, all of those things help to create a stronger foundation.
It's like a support system.
Yes.
Okay.
It's like a web of connections
Yeah.
that surrounds and supports the relationship.
I love that. And I think that's something that, especially as we get older, and, we're not necessarily in school or, in those environments where we're constantly meeting new people.
Right.
It can be really easy to kind of let those social networks dwindle.
It takes effort to maintain those connections.
Absolutely. Okay. And then the last one was sharing tasks.
Yeah.
So tell me more about that.
Okay, so this is all about contributing equally to the responsibilities of the relationship. So it's not just about chores,
Right.
Although chores are definitely a part of it.
Yeah, for sure.
It's about teamwork
Yeah.
and showing that you're both invested in making things work smoothly.
Yeah. So it's like, you're both pulling your weight.
Exactly.
And it's not just one person who's always carrying the load.
Right. It's about balance
Yeah.
and fairness.
And that can look really different depending on the relationship, right?
That's
So, in a romantic relationship, it might be about, dividing household chores or, financial responsibilities. In a work relationship, it might be about, making sure that the workload is distributed fairly.
Right.
In a friendship, it might be about, being there for each other emotionally,
Exactly. It's about reciprocity.
Yeah.
Making sure that there's a give and take.
Yeah, and I think that's such a key point, because sometimes we can fall into these patterns where it's like one person's always giving
Yay.
and the other person's always taking, and that can lead to resentment.
Absolutely. Resentment and burnout.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's really important to make sure that there's that balance and that both people feel like they're contributing.
Right. And that both people feel appreciated
Yes.
for their contributions.
Okay, so we've got these 5 communication strategies,
Yes.
Positivity, openness assurances, social networks, and sharing tasks. And what I think is so fascinating is that the research actually shows that these 5 strategies can predict how happy and stable your relationships will be.
Isn't that amazing?
It is.
I mean, it really highlights how important communication is to the health of our relationship.
Absolutely. And it makes sense, right?
It does.
Because if you think about it, all of those things contribute to, a feeling of connection and security.
A sense of being on the same team.
Yes, working together.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so I'm curious about this idea of pro-social and antisocial maintenance behaviors.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what those are all about?
Yeah, so pro-social maintenance behaviors are basically actions that strengthen the relationship,
Okay.
right? They're things that bring you closer together.
Okay.
And there's a whole range of pro-social behaviors. But some examples include expressing affection,
Okay.
doing kind things for each other, spending quality time together, just generally being supportive and attentive.
Okay, so like little things like making your partner coffee in the morning or surprising a friend with their favorite takeout.
Yeah, or just listening
Yeah.
without judgment when a friend is going through a tough time.
Right, just being present.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that these pro-social behaviors, they don't have to be grand gestures.
Right.
Right? It's really the little things
It's the little things that add up
that make a difference.
over time.
Yeah. Okay. And so then on the flip side, we have antisocial maintenance behaviors.
Right.
So tell me about those.
So antisocial maintenance behaviors are kind of the opposite
Okay.
of pro-social behaviors.
Uh-huh.
These are actions that are sometimes used to keep a relationship at a certain level
Interesting.
or to prevent it from becoming too close,
Okay.
right? So they're not necessarily about strengthening the relationship.
Right.
They're more about managing the distance or the intensity
Okay.
of the connection.
Okay. So can you give me some examples? Because I'm having a little trouble wrapping my head around that.
Sure. So some examples of antisocial maintenance behaviors might include avoiding certain topics,
Okay.
keeping secrets, being emotionally distant,
Okay.
or even engaging in jealousy-inducing behaviors,
Oh, that's interesting.
right? So it's like you're putting up a wall
Yeah.
to prevent the relationship from getting too close.
So that's almost like a defense mechanism.
It can be.
Yeah.
Yes, sometimes it's conscious,
Right.
sometimes it's unconscious, but it's a way of protecting ourselves
Right.
from getting hurt
Or from the relationship.
or from the relationship.
Changing.
Yeah.
Eh.
Or from feeling overwhelmed.
Yeah.
You know?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got these two different types of behaviors,
Mhm.
pro-social and antisocial.
Right.
And I think what's so interesting is that both of them can be used
Yes.
intentionally or unintentionally
Absolutely.
to shape our relationships.
Right. We're not always aware of the ways
Yeah.
in which we're maintaining our relationship.
Right. It's not always a conscious.
Right. Sometimes it's just patterns.
Yeah.
we've developed.
Right. Or habits.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, now I'm really curious to kind of dig into how this plays out in different types of relationships because,
Yeah.
I imagine it's going to look different if we're talking about, a romantic relationship versus a friendship versus a work relationship.
Absolutely.
So let's dive into that.
Okay, let's do it.
Okay, so first up, let's talk about mentor-student relationships.
Okay.
I think those can be so powerful,
That can be.
and I think,
Transformative.
yes, they can be so transformative. And I think especially, as we get older, and we're, maybe not in school anymore.
Yeah.
We might not have those formal mentors,
Right.
but it's still so important to have people in our lives that we can look up to and learn from.
Absolutely.
So how do we maintain those relationships?
Well, researchers have developed a model
Okay.
specifically for mentor-student
Oh,
relationship.
cool.
It's called the COMPASS model.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And it stands for conflict management,
Okay.
openness, motivation, positivity, advice, support, and social networks.
Wow. Okay, so it's like a whole package. It's not just one thing.
That's a holistic approach
Yeah.
to mentoring.
Okay, so let's break that down a little bit because I think there's a lot there.
There's a lot there, yeah.
So conflict management, so how does that play out in a mentor-student relationship?
Well, conflict is inevitable in any relationship, right? But in a mentor-student relationship, it's especially important to be able to handle conflict constructively.
Right.
Because you're in a position of power differential,
Yeah.
right? The mentor has more experience, more knowledge.
More authority.
Yeah. So it's really important to create a safe space where the student feels comfortable
Right.
voicing their concerns
Yeah.
or disagreements.
Yeah. And I think, it's important for the mentor to be able to take feedback
Yes,
too.
absolutely.
Right. And not be defensive.
Right. It's about being open
Yeah.
to different perspectives.
And to learning.
Yeah.
Right.
Because even mentors have things to learn
Exactly.
from their mentees.
I love that. Okay. So then openness.
Yeah. So openness is similar to what we talked about in terms of communication strategies. It's about being willing to share your thoughts and feelings honestly.
Okay.
And being a good listener. And in a mentor-student relationship, I think it's especially important for the mentor to be open about their own experiences,
Right.
both successes and failures.
Yeah.
Right? Because that helps the student to feel like they're not alone
Yeah.
in their struggles.
They're human.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It humanizes the mentor.
And I think it also helps to build trust.
Absolutely.
Right? Because you're showing that you're willing to be vulnerable
Yes.
and that you're not perfect.
Exactly.
Okay, so motivation. So how does that play into the COMPASS model?
So motivation is all about encouraging the student's growth and development.
Okay.
Right? So it's about providing support and guidance,
Okay.
but it's also about challenging the student
Right.
to step outside of their comfort zone.
To reach their full potential.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And I think that can be a really delicate balance,
It is.
right? Because you don't want to push somebody too hard,
Right.
but you also don't want to let them just coast.
Yeah, you want to find that sweet spot
Yeah.
where they're being challenged, but they're also feeling supported.
Yes. Okay, so then positivity, we kind of touched on that already, but
Yeah.
how is that specifically important in a mentor-student relationship?
Well, I think it's just so important to create a positive and encouraging environment for the student to grow and learn.
Okay.
It's about celebrating their successes and offering support when they face setbacks.
And I think it's also about modeling that positivity.
Yes.
Right? Because if the mentor is always negative
Yeah.
and, complaining,
It's going to rub off.
it's going to rub off on the student.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So advice, this seems pretty obvious, but
No. It's about providing guidance and feedback,
yeah.
but it's also about listening to the student's needs and goals and tailoring your advice accordingly.
Yeah, because one size doesn't fit all.
Exactly. Everyone's different.
Yeah. Okay, so then support.
So support is all about being there for the student
Okay.
through thick and thin. right? It's about offering emotional support,
Okay.
practical support,
Okay.
whatever the student needs to succeed.
Yeah, and I think that can look really different depending on the relationship, right?
Absolutely.
So sometimes it might be, offering to help with a specific task. Other times it might just be being a listening ear.
Right.
You know?
Just being present.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the last one, social networks.
Yeah, so this is about connecting the student
Okay.
with other people who can help them
Mm-hmm.
achieve their goals.
Okay.
So it might be introducing them to other professionals
Mm-hmm.
or connecting them with resources or opportunities.
And I think it's also about, being part of that student's support system,
Yeah.
right? And, maybe connecting with their family or friends and just kind of creating that broader network.
It's about expanding their social capital.
Yeah.
Right.
I love that. Okay, so the COMPAS model,
Yeah.
conflict management,
Yeah.
openness, motivation, positivity advice, support, social networks.
It's a lot.
It is a lot, but I think it's so valuable
It is.
because it really gives us a framework for how to build strong and supportive mentor-student relationships.
Yeah. And, it's not just about the student benefiting.
Right.
The mentor benefits too.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a mutually enriching
Yes.
relationship.
It's a two-way street.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about mentor-student relationships now. Let's move on to friendships.
Okay.
I think sometimes we take our friendships for granted,
We do.
because we're so focused on romantic relationships or
Yeah.
work relationships, but friendships are so important
They are essential.
for our well-being.
Absolutely. And, research has shown that
Yeah.
having strong friendships is actually one of the biggest predictors
Wow.
of happiness and longevity.
I believe it.
So we really need to prioritize our friendships.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us, we have those friends from childhood or from college, that we've known forever, and we just assume that those friendships will always be there.
Right.
But the reality is that friendships take work,
They do.
just like any other relationship.
Yeah. It's not enough to just assume that they'll always be there.
That they're just going to maintain themselves.
Right. We have to put in the effort.
Yeah. So how do we do that? What are some things that we can do to maintain our friendships?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to make time for each other,
Okay.
right? Even if it's just for a quick phone call or a coffee date,
Yeah.
it's important to stay connected.
Right. And I think it's also about quality time.
Yes, it's
Yeah.
not just about quantity.
Yeah.
It's about quality.
Because I think you can spend, a whole day with somebody
Right.
and not really feel like you connected.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about being present
Yeah.
and engaged.
And really listening to each other.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So making time for each other.
Mm-hmm.
What else?
Well, I think it's also important to be supportive
Okay.
of each other
Mm-hmm.
through thick and thin,
Okay.
right? So being there to celebrate the good times
Mm-hmm.
and offering a shoulder to cry on during the tough times.
Yeah. And I think, sometimes being supportive means, having those difficult conversations.
Right. Sometimes it's about holding each other accountable,
Yes. Exactly.
but always from a place of love and care.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So being supportive.
Mm-hmm.
What else?
Well, I think it's also important to have fun together.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Life is serious enough.
It is.
We need to make time for joy
Yes.
and laughter.
Yes. And I think it's so easy to get caught up in, the day-to-day grind.
Yeah.
And, all of the responsibilities that we have that we forget to just let loose
Yeah.
and have fun. Yeah. Okay. So make time for each other, be supportive, have fun together.
Mm-hmm.
What else?
I think it's also important to be forgiving.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Nobody's perfect.
Right.
We all make mistakes.
Yeah.
And it's important to be able to forgive each other.
And I think that can be really hard
It can be,
sometimes. Yeah.
especially
Yeah.
if we've been hurt.
Right.
But I think it's so important for the health of the relationship
Yeah.
to be able to let go of that resentment.
Yeah. And I think, forgiveness is not about condoning the other person's behavior.
Right.
It's about freeing yourself
Exactly.
from that anger and resentment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a gift you give yourself.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay. So be forgiving.
Mhm.
And then the last one I think is to communicate.
Yes.
Right.
Communication is key
It is.
in any relationship.
Yeah. And I think with friendships, it can be easy to kind of let things slide.
Right.
Because you're not living together.
Yeah.
You're not seeing each other every day.
Yeah.
So, if there's something that's bothering you, it can be easy to just kind of brush it under the rug.
Right.
But I think over time, those things can build up
They can.
and cause resentment.
Absolutely.
So it's really important to be open and honest with each other.
Yeah, and to be assertive
Yes.
about your needs.
Yes, and to be able to have those difficult conversations
Yes.
in a way that is
Respectful.
respectful and loving.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are some great tips for maintaining friendships. Now, let's talk about romantic relationships, because I think that's a whole other long level.
That's a whole other level
Yeah.
of complexity.
Yes.
Yeah.
So how do we maintain those romantic relationships and keep that spark alive?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to remember that romantic relationships evolve over time.
Okay.
Right. So what works in the early stages of dating might not be what works
right.
5 years down the road.
Exactly.
You know? So it's important to be adaptable
Right.
and to be willing to adjust your approach as the relationship grows and changes.
So it's like learning to dance together,
It is.
right? You're constantly kind of adjusting and
Yeah.
responding.
Each other's steps.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things that can be really challenging in romantic relationships is that we often come in with these expectations, right, based on, our past experiences or
Yeah.
what we've seen in movies or TV shows.
Right. Or what we've learned from our families.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And so it's really important to be able to communicate those expectations.
Absolutely. And to be willing to compromise.
Yes.
Right. Because you're not always going to see eye to eye.
Right. And what works for one person
Yeah.
might not work for the other person.
Right.
And that's okay.
It's okay. It's about finding what works for both of you.
Yeah. So communication compromise. What else is important for maintaining romantic relationships?
Well, I think it's also important to keep the romance alive.
Oh, okay. How do we do that?
Well, it doesn't have to be anything grand or expensive.
Right.
It's really the little things
Yeah.
that matter.
So like what kinds of things are we talking about?
Well, leaving a love note,
Okay.
bringing home flowers, cooking a special meal,
Okay.
planning a date night,
Mm-hmm.
just doing little things to show your partner that you care.
And I think it's also about, making time for intimacy,
Yes.
right?
Both physical and emotional.
Yes.
Right. It's about connecting
Yeah.
on a deeper level.
And that can look really different for different couples,
Absolutely.
right?
There's no right or wrong way to be intimate.
Yeah. So it's about figuring out what works for you
Yeah.
and your partner.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So keep the romance alive.
Mm-hmm.
What else?
Well, I think it's also important to support each other's dreams, right? So being your partner's biggest cheerleader, encouraging them to pursue their passions.
Yeah. And I think that can be hard sometimes.
It can be.
Right. Because, sometimes our partner's dreams might not align
Right.
with our own,
Yeah.
or we might be afraid that if they achieve their dreams,
Yeah.
it's going to change the relationship,
Right.
you know?
It's about being willing to grow together.
Yes.
Yeah.
And to support each other
Yeah.
through those changes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so support each other's dreams.
Mm-hmm.
What else?
Well, I think it's also important to have fun together.
Oh, yeah, we talked about that with friendships, but expert speaker.
That's important in romantic relationships, too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be really easy to get stuck in a rut,
Yeah.
especially, if you've been together for a long time.
Absolutely.
And, you're just kind of going through the motions.
Yeah. You get comfortable
Yeah.
and you stop making an effort.
Yeah, and so it's important to just, shake things up. Yeah.
And to do something fun together.
Yeah, try new things together.
Yes.
Keep things exciting.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about communication compromise.
Right.
Keep the romance alive, support each other's dreams, have fun together. What else?
Well, I think it's also important to work through conflict constructively.
Okay, so we touched on this a little bit earlier. But
Yeah.
Can you expand on that?
Yeah, so, conflict is inevitable in any relationship,
Right.
but it's how you handle conflict
Yes.
that determines whether it's going to be a destructive force or a constructive force
Okay.
in the relationship.
So what are some tips for working through conflict constructively?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to choose your battles,
Okay.
right? So don't sweat the small stuff.
Right, pick your battles.
And how do you know which battles to pick?
Well, I think it's about asking yourself, is this something that's really important to me?
Okay.
Or is this something that I can let go of?
Right. And I think sometimes we have to be willing to compromise,
Yes.
right?
Absolutely.
Because, it's not always going to be about getting your way.
Right. It's about finding a solution
Yeah.
that works for both of you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, so choose your battles. What else?
Well, I think it's also important to fight fair.
Okay, what does that mean?
So that means no name calling,
Okay.
no personal attacks, no bringing up the past.
Okay.
Stick to the issue at hand.
And I think it's also important to take breaks.
Yes.
Right? If things are getting too heated.
You're feeling overwhelmed?
Yeah.
Take a break.
Step away.
Yeah.
Cool
down.
Calm down.
And come back to it.
And come back to it when you're both in a better headspace.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so choose your battles, fight fair, take breaks. What else?
Well, I think it's also important to be willing to apologize.
Oh, that's a big one.
Yeah. It's hard.
It is hard.
But it's so important.
And I think, sometimes we get so caught up in being right. Yeah.
That we forget to just apologize.
Yeah, ego gets in the way.
Yes.
Exactly.
Exactly.
But apologizing doesn't mean that you're wrong.
Right.
It just means that you value the relationship.
More than being right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to forgive each other.
Yes.
Right? Because if we're not willing to forgive each other,
Yeah.
then that resentment is just going to build up.
Exactly.
And it's going to poison the relationship.
It'll eat away at the relationship.
Yeah. Okay, so work through conflict constructively. Anything else for maintaining romantic relationships?
Well, I think it's also important to make time for each other.
Okay, we talked about that with friendships. But
Yeah, it's important in romantic relationships too.
yeah,
Because, life gets busy
it does.
and it's easy to let work and other commitments take over.
Right.
So it's important to schedule in time for each other.
Yeah, whether it's a date night or just a few minutes to connect at the end of the day.
Yeah, even if it's just 15 minutes.
To sit down and talk
Yeah,
without distractions.
without the phones.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just to be present with each other.
yeah. Okay, so make time for each other.
Mm.
Anything else?
Well, I think it's also important to show appreciation.
Well, that's a good one.
Yeah. It's easy to take each other for granted,
It is.
especially when you've been together for a long time.
Yes.
So it's important to make an effort to express your gratitude
Okay.
for all the things.
So, what kinds of things?
Well, thanking your partner for doing the dishes,
Okay.
or for giving you a massage, or for just being there for you.
Yeah. And I think, it doesn't have to be a big grand gesture.
Right.
It can just be a simple thank you
Yeah.
or a hug.
Or a smile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it's also important to be specific,
Yes.
right?
Tell your partner what you appreciate about them.
Yes. Don't just say oh, I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Be like, I appreciate that you always make me laugh. Or I appreciate that you're always there for me.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so show appreciation. Anything else?
I think the last one is to be mindful of your words and actions.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So, our words and actions have a big impact
They do.
on our partners.
Yeah.
So it's important to be mindful of how we're communicating.
Right, yeah.
And to make sure that we're treating each other with respect.
Yeah, and I think, sometimes we can get so comfortable with each other that we start to take each other for granted, and we might say things or do things that we wouldn't say or do to a stranger,
Yeah.
And so it's important to just remember that, even though we're in a relationship,
Right.
we still need to treat each other with kindness and respect.
Absolutely.
Okay, so those are some great tips for maintaining romantic relationships. Now, let's talk about long-distance relationships, because I think those present their own unique set of challenges. So how do we maintain those relationships when we're not physically together?
Well, I think one of the most important things is to communicate regularly.
Okay.
Right. And that means more than just texting or emailing.
Okay.
It's important to have those phone calls or video chats
Right.
where you can actually see each other's faces.
Right, and hear each other's voices.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to be intentional about those conversations.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's not just about catching up.
Right.
It's about sharing your thoughts and feelings and staying connected on an emotional level.
And what are some other things that we can do to maintain long-distance relationships?
Well, I think it's also important to visit each other
Okay.
as often as possible.
Right.
Even if it's just for a weekend, it's important to have that face-to-face time.
Yeah. And I think it's also important to make plans for the future,
Yes.
right? So that you have something to look forward to.
Yeah, it gives you something to work towards.
Yeah. Yeah. And it shows that you're both committed to the relationship.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So communicate regularly, visit each other, make plans for the future. Anything else?
Well, I think it's also important to be understanding and patient.
Okay.
Long-distance relationships are tough.
They are.
And there are going to be times when you miss each other
Mm-hmm.
and you're going to feel frustrated.
Right.
And that's okay.
Yeah.
It's normal.
Yeah.
But it's important to communicate those feelings
Yes.
to each other.
And to be supportive of each
Yeah.
other.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So those are some great tips for maintaining long-distance relationships. Now, let me lift gears a little bit
Okay.
and talk about the role of technology in relationship maintenance.
Okay.
It's interesting because on the one hand,
Yeah.
technology has made it so much easier to stay connected.
Right.
We can text, we can video chat,
We can email.
we can email, we can social media,
Yeah.
all of that. But on the other hand, I think sometimes technology can also make it harder to maintain relationships.
It can.
So I'm curious to get your thoughts on that.
Well, I think you're right. Technology is a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
On the one hand, it allows us to stay connected with people
Mm-hmm.
who are far away
Right.
or who we don't see very often.
Yeah, and I think it can also be really helpful for people who are shy or introverted,
Yes.
because it gives them a way to connect with people
Yeah.
without having to be face to face.
Right. It can be less intimidating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there are definitely a lot of benefits to technology.
Absolutely.
But what about the downsides?
Well, I think one of the biggest downsides is that it can be really easy to get distracted
Oh, yeah.
by technology.
Especially now
Yeah.
with, our phones and
Right.
social media and everything.
We're constantly bombarded
Yes.
with notifications and updates.
Yeah, and so it can be really hard to just be present
Yeah.
with the people that we're with.
And I think it can also lead to unrealistic expectations.
Okay.
When we're constantly scrolling through social media,
Mm-hmm.
we're seeing these curated versions of people's lives,
Right.
right?
Like the highlight reel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so it can be easy to start comparing ourselves
Yes.
to these idealized versions of people.
And to feel like we're not measuring up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that can also lead to a fear of missing out.
Yes.
Right. FOMO.
And FOMO.
FOMO.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how do we kind of find that balance?
Well, I think it's important to be mindful of how we're using technology,
Okay.
to set boundaries
Mm-hmm.
and to make sure that we're not letting technology take over our lives.
Right. So like maybe having certain times a day where you put your phone away,
Yes.
or maybe having tech-free zones in your home,
Yeah. Like the dinner table.
like the bedroom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And I think it's also important to remember that technology is just a tool.
Yes.
It's not a replacement for human connection.
It's a way to enhance our connections.
Not to replace them.
Right.
Yeah. And I think, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately is this idea of strategic versus routine relationship maintenance.
Okay.
So can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So strategic maintenance is basically when you're making a conscious effort
Okay.
to maintain the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like planning a date night
Okay.
or buying your partner flowers or calling your friend
Okay.
to catch up.
So it's like you're putting in the effort.
Yeah. You're being intentional.
Okay. And then what about routine maintenance?
So routine maintenance is more about those everyday things
Okay.
that you do
Uh-huh.
that contribute to the maintenance of the relationship,
Okay.
but you're not necessarily doing them consciously.
Okay.
So it's like making dinner together
Okay.
or watching a movie together
Mhm.
or just talking about your day.
Okay. So it's like the little things that we do without even thinking about it.
Exactly.
That actually contribute to the health of the relationship.
Absolutely.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. And what's really fascinating is that research has shown that routine maintenance
Yeah.
is actually more strongly associated with relationship satisfaction
Really?
than strategic maintenance.
Wow. I would have thought it would be the other way around.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But it makes sense when you think about it because those everyday interactions,
yeah.
those are the things that really build intimacy
Yeah. And connection.
and trust.
And trust.
Yeah. So it's not just about those grand gestures.
Right.
It's really about the little thing.
It's about showing up for each other.
Yes.
Day in and day out.
In those everyday moments.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. And I think another important model
Okay.
for understanding relationships
Mm-hmm.
is Knapp's relational development model.
Oh, okay. Tell me more about that.
So Knapp's model basically outlines the stages
Yeah.
that relationships go through
Okay.
from coming together to
Mhm.
coming apart.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it's like the whole life cycle
Yeah.
of a relationship.
Exactly.
Okay. So what are those stages?
Well, there are 10 stages in total,
Okay.
but we can break them down
Okay.
into 5 stages of coming together
Okay.
and 5 stages of coming apart.
Okay. So let's start with the coming together stages.
Okay.
What's the first stage?
So the first stage is called initiating.
Okay.
And this is basically when you first meet someone
Okay.
and you're making those initial impressions.
So like that first date
Yeah.
or that first conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's all about those first encounters.
And then what happens after initiating?
Well, if you're both interested,
Mm-hmm.
you move into the experimenting stage.
Okay.
And this is where you start to explore
Hmm.
each other's interests
Okay.
and values.
So it's like you're trying to see if there's a connection.
Yeah, you're trying to find common ground. Yeah. And then what happens after experimenting?
Well, if you find that there's a connection,
Hmm.
you move into the intensifying stage.
Okay.
And this is where things start to get more serious.
Okay.
You start to spend more time together.
Mm-hmm.
You start to share more personal information.
Okay.
And you start to develop a deeper emotional connection.
So it's like you're moving beyond the superficial.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You're letting your guard down.
Yeah. And then after intensifying.
Well, if things continue to go well,
Mm-hmm.
you move into the integrating stage.
Yeah, okay.
And this is where you start to see yourselves
Mm-hmm.
as a couple.
Okay.
You start to use those coupley terms.
Like we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your social circles start to merge
Mhm.
and people start to see you as a unit.
And then the final stage of coming together.
Is bonding.
Okay.
And this is where you make a public commitment
Okay.
to the relationship.
So like getting married or
Yeah.
moving in together?
Yeah. Or even just making it Facebook official.
Right.
Okay. So those are the 5 stages of coming together.
Yes.
Now let's talk about the 5 stages of coming apart.
Okay.
What's the first stage?
So the first stage of coming apart is differentiating.
Okay.
And this is where you start to focus more on your differences
Okay.
than on your similarities.
Okay. So it's like you're starting to create some space.
Yeah, you're starting to pull back
Okay.
a little bit.
And then after differentiating.
Well, if that continues,
Uh-huh.
you move into the circumscribing stage.
Okay.
And this is where you start to restrict communication.
Okay.
You start to avoid certain topics and you start to spend less time together.
So it's like you're drawing a circle around certain areas of the relationship and saying like, these are off limits.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And then what happens after circumscribing?
Well, if that continues,
Mm-hmm.
you move into the stagnating stage.
Okay.
And this is where the relationship starts to feel stale.
Okay.
It's like you're just going through the motions.
Yeah.
There's no excitement.
And no passion.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like you're stuck in a rut.
And then after stagnating.
Well, if that continues,
Mhm.
you move into the avoiding stage.
Okay.
And this is where you start to actively avoid each other.
Okay.
You start to make excuses
Hmm.
to not see each other.
So it's like you're just trying to get out of the relationship.
Yeah, you're trying to create distance.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And then the final stage of coming apart.
is terminating.
Oh.
And this is where the relationship officially ends.
Right. So
Yeah.
it's like the breakup
Yeah.
or the divorce.
Yeah.
Okay. So those are the 10 stages
Yes.
of Knapp's relational development model.
Right.
And I think it's so interesting because it really shows
Yeah.
that relationships are not static.
They're dynamic.
Yes.
They're constantly evolving.
Yeah. And I think, it's helpful to have this model because it can help us to understand where we are
Yeah.
in our own relationships.
And where we might be headed. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this has been such a fascinating deep dive into relationship maintenance.
Yeah. It has.
We've covered so much ground.
We have.
But before we wrap up,
Yeah.
I want to circle back to this idea of idealization
Oh,
because I think it's something that we're all susceptible to,
we are.
especially with social media.
Especially with social media.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up
Yes.
in comparing ourselves.
To these perfect images
Yeah.
that we see online.
Okay.
And so I'm curious to get your thoughts on how we can avoid idealizing our partners.
Well, I think one of the most important things is to remember that social media is not real life,
Okay.
right?
It's a curated version of reality.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's the highlight reel.
Right.
It's not the behind the scenes.
Right. And I think it's also important to remember that everyone has flaws,
Yes.
right?
Nobody's perfect.
Nobody's perfect, and that's okay.
And that's what makes us human,
Yes.
you know?
And I think it's also important to focus on the good in our own relationships, right? Instead of comparing our relationships to other people's relationships.
Right. The grass is always greener.
Yes,
Right.
exactly. And, one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot lately is this idea of how important it is to choose our partners wisely.
Yes.
Because I think sometimes we get so caught up in the excitement of a new relationship
Yeah.
that we don't really stop to think about
Yeah.
whether this person is actually a good fit for us.
Right.
You know?
Like swept away.
We get swept away. And I think, it's important to be realistic
Yeah.
about our expectations.
Absolutely.
And to remember that no relationship is perfect.
Right. They're going to be challenged.
There are going to be challenges in any relationship.
Yeah.
But I think, if you choose your partner wisely,
Mhm.
and if you're both willing to put in the work,
Yeah.
then you can have a really happy and fulfilling relationship.
Absolutely.
Okay, so choosing our partners wisely. What else?
Well, I think it's also important to take care of ourselves.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We can't pour from an empty cup.
right.
So if we're not taking care of ourselves,
Yeah,
we're not going to be able to show up
for our partners
for our partners.
in the way that we want to.
Exactly.
Yeah, so what are some things that we can do to take care of ourselves?
Well, it's different for everyone,
Right.
but some things that might be helpful include
Mm-hmm.
eating healthy foods,
Okay.
getting enough sleep,
Mm-hmm.
exercising regularly,
Okay.
spending time in nature,
Okay.
meditating,
Mm-hmm.
doing things that bring you joy.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, it's also important to have boundaries
Yes.
in our relationship.
Absolutely.
Right.
To have some time to yourself.
To have some space.
Have some space.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So take care of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else?
Well, I think the last one is to never stop learning and growing.
Relationships are always a work in progress.
Yes.
And there's always room for improvement.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to be open to feedback, to be willing to try new things.
Yeah.
And to never stop learning.
About yourself.
Out at yourself.
And about your partner.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so those are some great tips for maintaining relationships. And I think, the most important thing is to just be mindful and intentional
At present.
about our relationships.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, this has been such a fascinating conversation.
It has.
Thank you so much for sharing your insights with us.
My pleasure.
So as we wrap up, I'd love to hear, what are some key takeaways our listeners can apply to their own relationships?
Okay, well, I think one of the biggest takeaways is that relationship maintenance is not a one-size-fits-all approach.
Okay.
What works for one couple or one friendship might not work for another.
Right. So it's really about finding what works for you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think another important takeaway is that it's okay to ask for help.
Okay.
If you're struggling in a relationship, don't be afraid to reach out to a therapist or a counselor.
Yeah.
There's no shame in asking for help.
And I think, sometimes we can get so caught up in this idea that we have to figure everything out on our own,
Right.
but the reality is that we're all human
Yeah,
and we all need support sometimes.
absolutely.
Yeah. So don't be afraid to reach out for help.
Mhm.
Now, thinking about all the different types of relationships we discussed, is there any advice that you would give that would apply across the board?
I think the most important thing is to be present,
Okay.
in all of your relationships.
Okay.
To really show up for the people that you care about.
What does that mean?
It means being fully engaged
Okay.
when you're with them.
Mm-hmm.
It means listening to them
Right?
without judgment.
Yeah.
It means making them feel seen and heard and valued.
And I think, it's also about being mindful
Yes.
of our words and actions.
Because even small things
Yeah.
can have a big impact
On our relationship.
on our relationships.
So it's really about being thoughtful and intentional
Exactly.
about how we're interacting with the people that we care about.
And I think it's also important to be forgiving.
Okay.
We all make mistakes.
Right.
And it's important to be able to extend grace
To ourselves.
to ourselves and to others.
Yeah. And I think, sometimes it can be really hard to forgive,
It can be.
especially if we've been hurt.
Yeah.
But I think it's so important for our own well-being
Right?
to be able to let go.
Yeah. Forgiveness is a gift you give yourself
Yes.
more than anyone else.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So be present, be mindful, be forgiving. Any other final words of wisdom?
Well, I think the last thing I would say is that relationships are a journey,
Okay.
not a destination.
Okay.
There are going to be ups and downs.
Right.
There are going to be challenges.
Yeah.
But if you're with the right people and if you're both willing to put in the work,
Yeah.
then the journey is worth it.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive
My pleasure.
into relationship maintenance.
It's been fun.
It has been, and I think we've all learned a lot.
I hope so.
So to our listeners, we encourage you to take what you've learned today and apply it to your own relationships.
Yeah, go out there and nurture those connections.
Exactly. And remember
Yes.
that relationships take work,
They do.
but they're so worth it.
Absolutely.
So until next time,
Okay.
happy connecting.
Take care.